Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Traversing the Stars podcast. How are my loyal listeners? Thank you for your continued support. And as always, be sure to smash that subscribe button, everybody. We have an amazing show for you all because aboard the mothership is Jason Starr. He's the author of numerous award-winning novels and comics. His new novel, The Next Time I Die, releases soon. Now come join me as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Starr. Thank you so much for coming to the Traversing the Stars podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's definitely my pleasure, sir. My wife is a huge fan of yours, and she enjoyed your new book a lot. So my wife wanted to make sure. She said, if you're when you talk to Mr. Starr, let him know she loves your new book.
Okay.
It was.
Okay.
Oh, I enjoyed it
That's
as well,
great.
most certainly. So I always start off with a question of inspiration. So, what inspired you to write your new book, or writing in general, and who your earliest influences?
Okay, I guess I'll start with my earliest influences. I didn't really start writing until I got into college. So like when I was growing up, I wasn't really that into writing. I was into sports and reading a lot of comic books. So I would say my first real influences with writing were when I started reading John Cheever's short stories when I was in college, Raymond Chandler. I was influenced by comic books, growing up, but those were the first like literature I started getting into. And Hemingway, anybody who wrote very clearly and concisely. And then I started out writing plays in college. A lot of my early short stories had a lot of dialogue, so I figured might as well write plays. And I had some in my 20s. I had some off Broadway shows produced, but I was always reading a lot of crime fiction, in particular. So Jim Thompson became like one of my big influences. From you were the Grifters, The Killer Inside Me. Elmore. When I started reading Elmore Leonard, I read every Elmore Leonard novel I could get my hands on. Loved Patricia Highsmith, and Philip K. Dick. I was reading a lot of sci-fi, like Philip K. Dick, in particular. And yeah, so those were some of my big.
Very cool. So what did you say in your writing? Was it the dialogue that developed first, or was it the description that or the narration that developed first?
Yeah, it was definitely dialogue completely. In fact, some of my early short stories were all dialogue. It was just there were no description. That was and plotting. There were no plots really. It was just like very slice of life dialogue. And I think I had like hopefully like a good natural ear for dialogue. But when I started writing crime fiction, my books became my writing became a lot more plot driven, and now I completely think in terms of plots. It never starts with the characters or the dialogue. I always think of a situation, basically asking myself, what if, like a what if sort of question, which is a big thing for this book. For The Next Time I Die, it's a big like what if sort of book. But and then my plots come out of usually asking that such a question, like one. So I'm always in the mindset of what if this happened? What if that happened? And then
I find it fascinating, like how writers develop over time. Like some writers develop, as you said with you, like dialogue first. Some are more into descriptive imagery. It takes a while for them to learn their voice. What do you think it developed the way you did when you said you kind of did a lot of dialogue and then eventually you've now become very more plot driven? Like, what do you think in that transition that happened?
I think it was definitely not a moment, but like I guess like a decision I made to start writing what I like to read. I think, and a lot of young writers I noticed do this. I teach in the MFA program. Shout out to the MFA program at St. Francis College in Brooklyn, where I lecture and I'm a mentor, and I'm also starting the first MFA program.
Awesome! That sounds fantastic. Great.
Yeah. So you could actually focus on comics and graphic novels. We think we're the only one doing it like as a whole focus for a degree. But yeah, so wait, no, your
So
question, wait.
the part of my question was how you developed from dialogue driven stories to plot driven stories.
Oh yeah. So I tell my students all the time that like um you should really write what you like to read. And so for me it was that realization um that I was really trying to write like a certain type of short story that I was reading. Like, in creative writing classes, I was reading a lot of Raymond Carver, and also like who had like a lot of dialogue and like sort of slice of life sort of stories. So I kind of thought like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm like, I was almost like trying to write what I thought like
Hmm.
you're supposed to write in a creative writing class, um, rather than writing what I was really enjoying reading and like the types of movies I was watching, like crime movies and old film noir and uh, very plot driven stuff. So it's sort of realizing that I should be writing what I like to read rather than what I
So
think I
as
should be
now
writing.
that you're a professor and you're teaching writing comics things of that nature, have you learned something from teaching? Like have you as you're preparing to prep your classes and helping your students think, I haven't thought about writing in this way, and then suddenly, you kind of had a eureka moment in your own writing.
Um, yeah, sometimes I think like just the whole process of teaching makes you sort of look at every time I try to help someone with their writing and analyze what they're doing, it kind of makes me
Mm.
rethink what I'm doing with my writing. So if I start talking about like how it's important to get into a writing routine or um, focusing on if you feel like you have a weakness in description or dialogue, to like really lean in and focus on it. As I start discussing those things, it does help me as well, because like I start thinking about like, oh, it's sort of like a refresher, right? Because you realize like, oh, so it's a kind of like good
It
way
sounds,
to
it
reset
sounds like on
myself.
some level, as a professor, you're both the teacher and the student at the same time because you're kind of like teaching like teacher stars now giving information to student star how to um reanalyze what they're writing.
Yeah,
So once again,
yeah,
you've had
exactly, exactly.
once again you have a massive, amazing writing career. There's no doubt it's an amazing career in, as a writer. Do you consider yourself more of a comic writer or a novelist? And how does each form, create comic books and novels, stretch different muscles?
Yeah, I think I see myself as both. I started, well, like I was saying before, I was reading a lot of comics growing up. I didn't start writing comics until I'd already written a number of novels. An editor, Will Dennis at DC Comics and Vertigo, had read some of my crime novels, and then he asked me to do a introduction for Brian
Ooh.
Azzarello's 100 Bullets. So that was like the first thing. So I wrote an introduction for that. I wrote an intro to one of Jason Aaron's books, Scalped, for Vertigo, and then I eventually was able to pitch an idea for Vertigo for my own graphic novel. I wound up meeting some editors from DC and then Marvel, and then like it spun out into this whole other uh, thing that I was doing, like while I was writing books. So I really like the going back and forth. I mean, comics is much more collaborative, obviously, than writing a novel. It actually reminds me of theater in a way because there's so many people involved. There's a similar writing, and when I was writing it, Marvel. The editor I was working with and a bunch of the assistant editors all had theater backgrounds, and it was interesting that like a lot of people who are interested in theater wound up working at Marvel, and I think it's because there's a similar
Mm.
collaborative effort that has to go into producing it. Well, on the surface, it seems like there'd be completely different comics and plays, but there is something similar about it, and I like that uh, the going back and forth between being
Mm.
solitary and in my head and writing a book, and then collaborating with artists and editors. So I like that part of it. From a functional standpoint, just writing a comic is obviously just much more visual. You have to always think about the space on the page and what the page is going to look like, and the page turn effect, having a cliffhanger on every page, stories ending at 20 to 22 pages, when in a novel you have almost like endless space. So it's just conceptually, when you're just thinking about how you're going to plot your book, it's very different. A comic and um, a novel, like a comic, requires a lot, being a lot more precision in the plotting.
It's kind of interesting that you're
Best way I could
comparing
describe it.
on some level comic books with plays, because I'm thinking as you were talking that they really are kind of similar as far as from a writer's perspective, dialogue driven from the writer's perspective. I mean, obviously there's art versus stagecraft. At the same time,
Yeah.
as you're trying to develop how a panel looks as well, you're stuck within a border of a panel versus border of a stage. So I guess on some level, there's a very similar aspect between theater, playwriting, comic book writing.
Yeah, I mean, in a play, you're thinking always about the space on the stage, and how you're going to giving instructions to how to move actors around, and the dialogue is almost secondary to that, in a way, similar to how it is in a comic, where it's also visual. It's all about the art, and the art moving the story forward, just like the actors and the director move a play forward. And the uh, the dialogue is really sort of the structure of just how you're moving it. Yeah, so there's some interesting similarity. Yes, definitely from a writing standpoint, but also just from how uh, it can't exist without other people. Like a book, an editor obviously edits, but you can self-publish a book. You don't really need anyone else to write a book. For a play or comic to exist, you need the actors, you need the director, and for comic, you need um, the artist, the colorist. I don't know if you need the editors. No, you need.
Unless your novel comes out absolutely perfect the first time through, then it's not needed. But it's not the way you start. I mean, you start in the world of comic books through Brian Azzarello and Vertigo. That's a hell of a way to start. That's like starting sports automatically in the Major League Baseball. You immediately went to the very top to start out with. Not a bad way.
Right, and then I worked with Brian on there was a project at DC, a mashup of Batman, the Spirit, Doc Savage, and the Avenger in like their own universe, and Brian was in charge of it, and I just wrote the Avenger character. It was like a 10, exactly. It was a backup story. And then I also did like one of the issues where all the characters interact, so it was fun to write Batman and Doc Savage. But so I worked. That was one of the first things I did. You're right. It was just like being thrown into the major leagues.
No minor leagues for you. You're just like, you know what? Screw it. I can handle the professional league. To start off, what the hell?
Right.
That's awesome. So, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, you are the writer of The Next Time I Die, which is a fantastic novel. Like I said, my wife has been talking about it all day.
There it is, June 28th.
June 28th. So, now that you're the author of The Next Time I Die, what inspired the creation of this novel? And since it's also a departure from your prior work, when did you feel that this novel was ready to be turned tangible?
Like when I thought it was ready to be
typed out. Yeah, to go from your head to the paper to the page.
Usually, I'm always coming up with ideas, and I have most of them aren't very good, but I always have like ideas that are the germs of ideas. And I'm usually, when I'm writing something else, I start writing a few other things, and that I'll at some point I'll go back to. And it's usually a good sign, like if I keep going back to one particular idea, then like it seems to really have legs. Like sometimes you go back to one and it's like, it's not that good, or you realize it's not going anywhere. But this one just seemed like something I really wanted to do. I've always wanted to write science fiction. This is still a crime novel. I mean, I'll be clear. I mean, there's a reason why Hard Case Crime is publishing it, but it's definitely a mashup of sci-fi and crime. I love alternate reality stories and stories about time travel. So I wanted to figure out like to do like my version of that in the context of a crime novel. So I mean, when I started writing it, let's see how to describe this. The book starts at without giving away any plot. The book starts at a specific time, unlike some of my other books. So I knew when I was writing this book in 2019, I knew that the book would start in February, late February, and I don't even know why. It was weird. I sort of like picked that date, but I had started the action of the book in late February 2020. So I was writing about the future, like as I was writing in like 2019, but I wanted to like, I thought I'd be finished with the book around then. I'd be submitting it to publishers or maybe it'd be published. But I didn't realize that COVID would break out and there would be a need for like an alternate universe. So I sort of, I mean, without like getting too much into that issue, because it's not like I go into COVID that much in the book, but I did have to account for the fact that I'm starting this book on in late February 2020. So when you read the book, you'll see that it caused, that I had to go back and make sure that like things like made sense because of that.
Right. Well, without giving too much away, you have, once again, so you're creating an alternate universe. You kind of created like the Jason Starr multiverse, and it's such as
right.
which I think is very interesting. So, I mean, I'm not sure how much we can say without giving away some details, but in chapter 2, there's a major plot twist where everything is kind of thrown upside down, especially from the protagonist's perspective.
Right.
So when you made that sudden that twist, right? Was it kind of both to shock the reader, but also because the fan of yours wasn't kind of expecting a sci-fi kind of crime thriller, the way you did it was also kind of shocked them as well, going, "Holy crap, that's not what he does!" And suddenly
I was definitely going for that. Like I knew, some readers who know me from my previous psychological thrillers would think I was going in that direction. I definitely wanted to like pull the rug out, like do something completely different that I hadn't done before. And that was the basic idea. Like when I had the idea for this book, I knew chapter 1 and like chapter 2. I didn't really know the details that were going to be in chapter 2, but like I knew that plot point would be there. The events that happened in chapter 1 would be there, and then that chapter 2 would be completely divergent from that. But yeah, I definitely wanted that rug pulling effect, and to do something different.
Because like I said, the first chapter really feels like a standard crime novel. I mean, you have a for basic plot for people. You have your protagonist, Even Blitz. He's a lawyer. He's defending a serial killer, Jeffrey Hammond. You have issues with his wife, plots of what's going on over there, and an affair. Things that it's very like hard boiled, kind of crime noir kind of feel to it. Then like I said, then obviously we hit chapter 2, and like I said, the rug's totally gone. It's suddenly slightly more Twilight Zone ish.
Right.
So like it is a hell of a turn when you're reading. You're like, okay, this is standard. This is Jason Starr standard. No, then you get to the second chapter, like, what the fuck? What's happening now? And I will say that the way you handle that second chapter as a reader, we at first, because it's very much from the perspective of Stephen Blitz. I mean, it's you're seeing it through his experience, right?
Right.
And as I will say, as the reader, seeing it directly from his experience, you're thinking, why are these people acting so full of crap? Why are they lying? Why are they, it takes you a few seconds to go, wait a second, this is really happening.
Right.
And what was it difficult to kind of walk that line in the second chapter where you get it from his perspective, but you kind of, I think you're intentionally putting that doubt in the reader to ask themselves, is it everyone else or is it him that's not oriented properly?
Well, I definitely wanted to I mean, in my mind, this is like a book that has to be in first person because it's all about being in Stephen's head and seeing it from his point of view. So I wanted you to experience everything that's happening as far as he's happening, as far as he perceives it. And yeah, so he sees, I wanted you to accept like what he sees as reality as
Mm.
reality. He's a first person narrator who might not necessarily be um, reliable. Um, yeah, I mean, I wanted to do my spin on what I saw as like a multiverse novel,
Mm.
um, where I mean, it's ultimately also a crime novel. Um, you know, a popular trope in crime fiction going back to film noir is like the amnesia novel where a character wakes up, there's a dead body, like how did it get there, like, and he has to retrace his steps, or uh so it's been, that sort of novel has been done in crime fiction. um I wanted to use like this alternate reality thing to tell that sort of story. Like he's basically waking up in a new, and has to put pieces of his life back together.
Mm.
And then it turns out there are crimes that are involved, like in the person he's uh, uh, defending, um, as that reality has changed. So uh, yes, I wanted to have you to be in his point of view. I wanted the alternate reality not only to be physical changes, which often happens in time travel, in classic sci-fi time travel books, where the world has changed and you might have to figure out why or how. But in this case, it's not only that the world has changed, but he might have changed his psychology.
Mm.
um, so that's what I really wanted to lean into. To me, I saw that as like the psychological thriller aspect of it that I might have treated completely. If I was writing a straight crime fiction, I might have gotten into that sort of question, those moral questions, in a different way. But I sort of used the sci-fi to get into them in this book.
Like I said, and I think you did a great job. And the other interesting thing is that there's obviously changes made to the different multiverses that the character ends up in. Not only in directly that it directly affects Stephen Blitz, but it changes to the actual world. I don't know. I don't think this is a spoiler to mention that, for instance, Al Gore's president in one of these multiverses. That so when you're deciding what changes you're making, not only in the big world but also in his immediate world, how are you plotting that butterfly effect? Where if I change this little thing, this is how things are going to play out from that point.
Yeah, I know it was complicated. That's why I think I did more revisions in this book than in previous book. Yeah, I mean, I think in any world building, there's a sort of butterfly effect, a domino effect, at least, of if you change one thing, it's going to affect everything else. And in this case, I mean, one thing I was definitely going for is that there are positives in the world, but it's not like really a wish fulfillment. There's also big, big negatives in the world. I mean, at first, it kind of like in his state, he sort of starts to like this reality without
Mm.
giving anything away. There are things that are better. He has a daughter now who seems to have a great relationship with. He has a lot of money. So there's certain, and there are many other changes, but there are changes in the world without giving anything away that are better, and some major events from the past didn't actually happen. Al Gore's president. I don't know if that's better or worse, depending on your politics. Uh,
You got
but
rid of Tom Brady as a
and
Patriot
Tom
fan.
Brady,
That hurt deeply inside.
but the Jets still suck. I had to.
Well,
I had
that's exists in every multiverse. I'm pretty sure.
any multiple. Even he couldn't even come up with another multiverse that was.
Well, I mean, like I said, there's some similarities to something like the Twilight Zone, and the Twilight Zone exists with each story. That's kind of like almost like a morality tale. As something happens, is based on some sort of philosophical or moral question that the protagonist has to go through or deal with in order to perceive, in the way he interacts with his world or by the end of the story. So for Stephen Blitz, what is it about him that is sort of being, I don't know, punished by being plunged into this multiverse, sort of? I mean, obviously he's a lawyer, he's defending a serial killer. Is that his immediate fault, or is it how he treats those around him? Because once again, every universe he's in, he's doesn't seems to find a way to fuck it up in some very distinct way. I mean,
Yeah. So yeah, no, that's interesting. Um, well, I saw it. I mean, this is how I approached it, writing it. And I get into it in the book, um, a few times, but I see it as like a question of nature versus nurture.
hmm,
Question: It is or is who he is affected by the events around him, events in the world. If someone is winds up in another a variation of their life that went into a different direction at a different at a past point in time,
hmm,
would they become a different person, or is there something affected by those new events that would make them into another person,
hmm,
or are who they are, like that can't be changed. uh um he talks about the person he's, because he is a defense attorney, and he's representing this killer who he knows as his attorney. He believes that his client is a psychopath, and um, he has no doubt about that. Uh, and he believes that in that can't change because that's just who he is.
hmm,
You can't change psychopathy. So, like in this new reality, he expects that person um, to be the same person he is. So, but at times he questions that. He wonders if that's actually true.
hmm. So what does it say about his fighting trait that, like I said, he does seem to find a way to screw up everything around him? So what does that say about his defining trait as a person?
Um, I don't want to give anything away, but like let's just say he might not be the person he thinks he is.
Well,
Because he has an idea of himself that he finds evidence to prove to himself, and I guess also to us, since we're the reader and he's talking to us, that he's a good guy. That again, he's telling us matter of factly what's going on in his life. Um, there's a subtext where I think the reader has to make their own decisions about him.
hmm. Now, when you talk about Jeffrey Hammond, the serial killer, also the client of Stephen Blitz in one of the realities, once again, there's a question of, obviously he is the same. Is the argument to, because unlike Stephen, his world hasn't changed throughout these different multiverses, or is once again something about him inherently that
His
is,
client about Hammond.
yeah, it's
Um,
inherent about him that
well,
causes him not to
Hammond
be
is the
different?
psychopath. I mean, he knows. I mean, Stephen's telling us that psychopaths don't change, and he expects uh, Hammond to be the same. He's surprised that the victims. This is where I definitely don't want to give too much away, but I'll just say this: he's surprised that the victims in who he knows, he's seen the autopsy photos of this case was about to go to trial, as the book's
Hmm,
starting. Um, Stephen, as the attorney, has seen the autopsy photos. He knows what his client is capable of. He knows what he's done. And then he sees that these people are still alive, but there are other victims who seem like, you know, uh, victims of his client, theoretically. So he wonders if, like, it's a nature versus nurture thing. Did did he do this, or is his client an innocent man in this new universe? Maybe he made different decisions.
hmm,
Um, I mean, I guess if someone is a psychopath, they're not necessarily going to act out on their desires. Some do, some don't, probably, right?
Hmm. So, because of the nature of the book and how it's set up, without giving anything away, are we looking at a potential multiverse series of Stephen Blitz stories? Like, is there going to be a book 2 where we go look again into more Stephen Blitz?
I have ideas. I mean, I guess it depends what the publisher wants, or like. But I wrote this in a way where I felt like there was a satisfactory ending, like where it ends. But yeah, I mean, if there was like a TV show or something based on this, like there, it could definitely go on. And so at some point, I might go back to it. There are various ways, there are various directions it could go. It could go.
Well,
I had one idea that involved Stephen Blitz, one that didn't actually. So
well, no pressure, but my wife demands a second book of this, so no pressure. But it's
okay.
but you're gonna have to make my wife happy. Just letting you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
I might very well do it. Yeah.
So you said so the book releases June 28th of Next Time I Die. Is that correct?
Yep, June 28th.
So what is next for you?
I'm working on another psychological thriller. It's not sci-fi, but it's something I haven't done before. That's all I'll say. Um, I'm working on that. I have a couple of TV projects in development. I have 2 recent graphic novels that are in stores now. Casual Fling and Red Border from AWA. Uh, and some other comics ideas in the works, but that's basically where I am.
Well, Mr. Starr, it's a pleasure to talk with you. Like I said, The Next Time I Die, it was a great novel. Especially like I said, my wife is been talking about it, so great job to make my